Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this presentation on managing difference and using the STEP principle. Hopefully, I want to make it, I say, as interactive as possible and get you guys involved. Three areas I'd like to look at this morning, really: understanding distinct links between education and the coaching environment. I think sometimes that people assume that differentiation is just an educational tool. But as I'll explain later, for me, it's an essential, crucial tool that we need to be using for coaching as well. Also utilising a differentiated coaching approach to meet the needs of players. First and foremost, it's really important that we understand coaching is about the players, not about putting on sessions. Sessions are important, but responding to the players' needs. What session do the players need to help them in their coaching journey? And finally, we're going to have a look at applying the STEPS principle to coaching in your environment. And that's really key, because it's great giving you the all singing, all dancing perspective on coaching in an ideal world. But what's fair to say that out in the community, everybody has different challenges that we need to look at today. Hopefully today we're going to get you to come up with some of your challenges, and I'm not saying I can answer them all, but hopefully we'll try and come up with some explanations to help you out with that. Okay. First things for me, I'm fortunate enough to, I'm going back a few years now. I've actually been in education about 30 years in total. Teaching sport and PE, but the biggest influence on my career, on my coaching career, was going out to America, where I ended up working for a gentleman who was a child psychologist, and he decided that he liked the idea of soccer, as we call football, because he wanted to find a game that his children could play. His children weren't very big, not very tall, not very athletic, and all the other sports in America lent themselves towards that parable that you needed to be strong, fit, and athletic. He set up some coaching camps in soccer, the first ones out there really, in the late 70s, early 80s, and I have to say his influence on me was massive. All his teachings were always about children first and sport second. With that, I mean that all the focus was on how do we understand children? What do we know about them? How do they play? How do they interact? What's different about them, And also the real important thing, that we were taught to treat them all as individuals. They've all got their own needs. How can we cater for those in the bigger picture? So for me, my beliefs, my philosophies revolve around that really. Always children first, sport second. That's a key area for me to work on. So starting off looking at differentiation, like I say, people think it's an educational tool, which it is. It's really crucial in education, but it's fundamental in coaching as well. And as I go around observing sessions, I'm involved in observing tutors working, involved in looking at teachers working, and going and doing lesson observations. Still the same challenges exist, that we're putting on sessions that are governed by a topic, as opposed to instead of being governed by what are the players' needs. And I think that's really important to know. For me, one size does not fit all. It can't. It's not possible. And there's many reasons for that. Like I say, there's still evidence out there that when I go out and watch and observe coaches doing level 1s and level 2 sessions, they're keen to say, oh, have you got any sessions that I could use? And my reply to them is, it's not the sessions. You need to find a session that will meet the needs of your players. First and foremost, what do your players need to learn? And if you put on a session, say, for example, you put on a receiving session, some of your players might be good at receiving and already advanced, and some of your players might be struggling. So, it's important that the theme of your sessions need to be centered around your players' needs. And it might be that you have to set up 2 different sessions to cater for those players. Or you might have to change the areas and the spaces and the sizes and the reference points. For example, you might have to say, you know, oh, you're doing really well at this session. You know, you could have, can you do it on 1 touch only? Whereas other players still might need 2 touches. So we need to make sure that we are meeting players' personal needs. And how do we know that? Well, we know that because we've watched them, we've observed them, and we know the ones that, if we're putting on a shooting session, a receiving session, will be challenged in those areas. And also understanding that players progress at various rates. And players will fall into different categories in those rates. You know, if you've got players that are forging ahead, how do you cope with those? What challenges have you put in there? I refer to those as extended tasks, and that's how they're referred to in education. What extended challenges have you put in there that would help those players? And also, you know, you might want to mix your players up. Do you put your players up against each other that are evenly matched, or do you challenge your players? But what you must avoid as well is making the challenges too hard for players, because that will affect their confidence, their self-esteem, and their motivation. So that's important. Okay, and looking at the STEP principles, just to remind us of that, there is another S on the end of that, which stands for safety. But the 4 we really want to look at this morning are space, task, equipment, and players. And we're going to go into those a bit more detail. But before we do that, what I'd like you to do, as grassroots coaches, what are your biggest challenges around steps and practice design? Could you post your answers on the chat, please? Rich?
Hello.
I can't see the chat, man. I can't see the chat.
That's right, mate. I'll be your eyes and ears, don't worry.
You're our ledge, mate.
Peter says space is something I struggle with a bit. Steve, not knowing numbers attending. Bjorn says space.
Yeah, definitely. We'll certainly look at the space issue. That's a big one. You know, how we approach that. What was the other one?
Not knowing numbers.
Not knowing numbers. That's always a challenge. Yeah, I think you know, not knowing numbers. For me, it's planning for different scenarios. I think sometimes a picture, you know, starts to appear with your players. Some will attend week in, week out, but others sometimes are a little bit flaky, and they might attend 1 week and not another week, you know. And I experienced that with my grandson. Some mornings he gets out of bed because he's had a late night and he doesn't really want to go training. And I know, you know, we sometimes have to push him to go. And of course that affects anybody's sessions. I always work on the premise that I've got a what if and then another what if. So, you know, and it can be really frustrating because sometimes with numbers, you're putting on a session to help your strikers, you know, and neither of them turn up on that particular session. Now, the session is not wasted because the other players will learn from that. You know, you can still do finishing, but it's not, you know, really what I set out to do on that particular session. So numbers are a significant factor without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
We've got David saying with one group that I coached, a vast difference in ability.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll talk about that when we look at tasks a bit later. But I'm a big fan of setting up lots of separate little sessions where, and obviously, you know, space is a crucial factor with that, because if you're only working, you know, if you're only allocated a small area, that might be a challenge to set up 2 or 3 different practices on the go. Again, how many assistant coaches have you got to help you there, or are you working alone?
A couple of things as well. Dave Senior says space and equipment. David Summers having time to set things up on the Astro when following other teams.
Yeah.
Advanced players dominating sessions.
Yeah. in terms of getting on the Astro and having to go on there straight away, I know sometimes we plan for a session for an hour. You've got an hour on there, but I'd rather have 45 minutes of quality than an hour of it. You know, because when I'm looking at players, I want it to be as high intensity, high in tempo as I possibly can have it in my sessions. So I want it to go bang, bang, bang. So if I do have to take 5-10 minutes getting them to set up, they can be doing a little arrival activity before that happens. You know, but I must have a picture in my mind of how I'm going to set it up, and you know, what's the minimum amount of cones I can use instead of putting lots of cones down, which takes longer to set out. You know.
Yeah. Robin says space, especially in winter training on 3G pitch, time in that format too. No setup time, just one fixed hour slot. We've just touched on.
Yeah.
And a couple of other people say not knowing numbers, etc.
Yeah. Can I say on that as well, Rich? I know for me it's a bone of contention, because when we run level 1, level 2 courses, we're always putting them on quality facilities, quality services. We've got all the equipment we need there, and sometimes it's observing that that's not always the case out in the real world with the coaches out there. So one of the things I think is really important is understanding the area that you've got available and how can you maximize its potential. Now, I know when I go out and observe coaches, and one particular session springs to mind. There was a coach there, bless him, was trying to do passing. It was his, it was his first observation, his first in situ visit, and he had a group of under 8s, and the pitch hadn't been cut. I reckon it must have been 4 inches long, and it was bobbly and bumpy, and just, the session was just not going to progress. It couldn't do. He picked the wrong topic for the wrong day, and what I might have done is had a plan B in my bag just in case. And like I say, it's okay if you're going to be on the 3G every week and it's a nice flat top quality surface. That's not going to change, but dealing with variables is really important as well.
Barry Dowling just says behaviour management, dealing with individuals who have special needs / attention.
Yeah. Barry, one of the ways I answer that question as well is understanding those players. My first question is always, why do they behave the way they do? Certainly with gifted and talented players, without a shadow of a doubt, quite often, I say to players, which of your players behave badly? And they'll say, I can't understand it because it's my best player. Well, what you need to look at then is probably the session's not stretching them enough. So are you putting on a session that they're able to learn from, or is it too easy for them? And at the other end of that scale, the players that are coping to keep up are struggling to get into the session or aren't technically good enough. So they quite often devise a technique. It's called a disruptive technique, where they'll constantly mess about. So what doesn't happen is they don't get exposed to being not very good, or other players laughing at them or making a joke of them. So again, we've got to make sure that the tasks are simple enough for those players as well. Going back to what I said earlier about maybe having 2 sessions on where you've got 2 pitches side by side, and the less able to work in with the less able, and the challenging ones are working together so we can forge on. But we'll talk about that in a minute as well in terms of space.
Can you just go for a couple more, mate?
Yes, mate. Yeah.
Yeah. Bjorn says using an 1/8 of a pitch and playing a possession exercise planned out from the back with 3 centre backs. Hard to make realistic to the game is so tight. Another one in that space is trying to work on corners and then counter attack from that.
Yeah, that's incredibly difficult. I mean, I think I empathise with you there. And one of the ways of doing it, I don't know how plausible this is, but sometimes I try and get my players to arrive there earlier on match days and put on a training session beforehand. Okay. When I say a training session, more related to set pieces, or I plan in my session, in my warm-up, that part of that might be just getting used to taking corners. Again, I always get the players to look at the size of the pitch that we're playing on. Is it wide? Is it long? Is it just a standard 9v9 pitch or 11v11? What are the challenges of that pitch on match days? Because I think match days are important when you look at how how can we get them there half an hour earlier? I know that's a big challenge, but these are things I suggest to my players. If we get there half an hour early, we can work on corners, we can work on set pieces, we can work on playing out from the back. And sometimes that has to be a match day scenario, because you're quite right, working on a third of a third of a third does not enable you to practice those elements on match days. Hopefully that answers that question. Please ask him to come back with another question if that's
yeah. Let us know, Bjorn. And Elliot says, agree that split into mini sessions is effective. It's more when you go into a bigger game where best players will dominate the ball. Yeah, well then I think you've got to put restrictions on them. I know some people don't like playing with a floater or a magic man or uneven sides. I certainly like, and I'll talk about it in a little minute, but I like what we call playing with underloads. So I like my players to play against, quite often we play with overloads where we put more players on one side, but I tend to focus on underloads, putting those talented players under more pressure. How will they cope if those sides are uneven? For example, if that best player, those best players are the strikers, I might put them in a scenario where they might be locked into an area in 3/3. It might be that we've got them playing into the striker, but they're playing one striker up against 3 defenders. There could be lots of different scenarios what you can say where you can unbalance it. But I certainly like to look at underloads as a principle for me. Cool. No further questions or suggestions at the moment, mate.
Okay, let's move on then. So just going on to space, as I said earlier, considering having multiple pitches is a key area. Different abilities being challenged accordingly. I know again we're talking about in an ideal world. Example, 2 or 3 different size pitches to enable all players the opportunity to work at their personal development level. I tend to play a lot of 3-on-3s, and there's a reason behind that. No goalkeepers, little small goals, and if I haven't got small goals, I'll just use cones. The reason for 3-on-3 for me, especially with the younger ones, is that they get maximum touches on the ball. Their decision making is more simple. They've only got one or two players to decide to pass to, or do they run with the ball and dribble. The rules are very simple, and we can have matchups then, hopefully. I think the challenges comes where possibly you've got, in terms of differentiation, when you've got 3 really good players and 3 not so good players, and how do we mix those up? But maybe you've got to then put restrictions on those players. They can only play with 1 touch, with 2 touches, and put down challenges that would help those players progress.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. East.
Yeah.
Just that Bjorn's come back, I thought it'd be just good to touch on it now. So he says, thanks. And getting kids to games early is not an issue, but often grass pitches can't warm up on them to protect them to last the season, or you're going back to back games on the 3G. However, good point, and I'll try that even for 10 minutes. Do you want opposition to see your routines?
I think at grassroots level, it's not going to be, fundamental, because sometimes it's all about the delivery. If the delivery is quality, it doesn't matter what the routine is. There's a chance you're going to get a cross on target. So, are you good at those? But remember, we're just looking at potential scenarios here. If we lived in an ideal world, we'd have perfect facilities. So we've just got to maximise what we've got, and it's just looking at ideas. And sometimes it's just trying things, coming out of your comfort zone and trying things outside the box that will work for you, and that's pretty important as well. I think other things as well, sometimes, certainly with space, is making sure it's appropriate to meet needs. If you make the space smaller and make it tighter, sometimes you'll challenge those players that are really good if they've got a smaller area to work in. Maybe with the players that are less capable, they need an extra touch, they need a bigger space. For an example as well, when I do shooting drills, usually if I was doing it with adults, it would be two 18-yard boxes, but we cut off the corners, the outside corners, so it would be a diamond shape. And the purpose of that would be you don't get people shooting from those corners in those angles. So again, there's nothing wrong with using circles. There's nothing wrong with using diamonds. All you're doing is replicating a part of the pitch that you want to work in. You know, again, coning off wide areas, that's important. Like I said earlier, going into zones. If your players are really good, do you then stick them into zones? If you're working, say you're working with your midfield three and you're looking at receiving and turning, I sometimes lock them into those areas so they're only working in key areas. So the good players are doing what you want them to do, but only in those areas. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Any more on the space?
None at the moment, no.
So tasks to consider. Individual tasks and challenges. I like to think this will be on match day and in training. I would like to think that we all need something to work for, and you know, I take a lead off my grandson sometimes. He's always asking me if he's done well. Did I do well today? Did I do well today? One of the ways I get around that with him is say to him, listen, what I want you to do is have two shots this half with your right foot and one with your left. Think you can do that? He said, yeah, definitely. So sometimes even in training, I will set them individual tasks and challenges, you know, again, appropriate to their level of learning and what they're playing against. Scenario-based tasks, I use these a lot. And it might be in your game situations where, you know, you're winning the game 1-0. So one team I might have briefed that they're winning the game 1-0. And if they can keep a clean sheet, they're going to win the league. The other team, they need to win the game and they need to win by 2 or 3 clear goals. Now, that just sets some game-related challenges and scenarios. Predominantly mostly for older players that I would use those scenario tasks. But again, something for them to work to and challenge. Matching the striker up versus the centre back. I think, you know, for me, I always wanted to play against better players and challenge myself. And I think if players are in the right frame of mind, they're not intimidated, they want the challenge, then quite often I will match up players against players to see how that works. Rules and conditions, rules on games. Sometimes I very rarely play throw-ins. I know that happens in a game, but if I'm looking to play to a match tempo, I'll say, right, whoever ball goes out of play, whoever picks that ball up, put the ball down on the touchline and pass it back in. We want to play at quick tempo. Again, if I'm playing 3-on-3, if the ball goes out of play, no throw-ins, we just play passing it back. Certainly with the younger ones, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of throw-ins. I'm not a big fan. I'm more keen on them getting as many touches on the ball as possible. If we can get the ball on the ground, that's going to help us. Number of tasks. So again, set them 3 or 4 different tasks within the sessions. And we can make those tasks easier as we go along. That's important as well. Time tasks, I'm very keen again to make sure the games are to a set time. For example, if I'm playing 3-on-3 games, they might be 3 minutes, 3-minute games, and then we'll change around. And it might be that we'll play in a little tournament, or it might be that we'll play 3 minutes, 2 minutes off, time to reflect, set them some more tasks. So what else can they do in those games? And it might be based on my observations. For example, I've seen you running with the ball there. This time in the game, can you play me a 1-2 in the game? You know, I want you to see if you can get more shots on target. So little things that will help them in their decision making. And the last thing really in that to take into consideration is players making decisions based on development stages. You know, we are where we are with our players, And it's important to be open and honest with them that, you know, and with their parents, that they're technically very good players, for example, but their match day experience is limited. And we want to build that up as we go along. That doesn't mean to say, you know, and I'm a big fan of making sure that we rotate players around on a regular basis. Everybody must have the same match times. Really important. If we're playing 7-a-side, I probably would only ever take 2 or 3 substitutes, because I think a minimum match time. If I've driven all the way up, if I've driven half an hour to go to a game, I would expect my grandson to be playing at least 50% of that game. So I think it's really important that, you know, they have a lot of game time. You don't get good at playing matches if you don't play in matches. You need to be out there playing. Any more questions come through?
Yes, mate. David says, regarding throw-ins, I guess it's about the intention of the session. On another FA webinar on Build the Attack, they stressed restarts and not just going from the goalkeeper, keeping it realism.
Yeah, I'm 100% with that. And Dave's quite right. It depends on what session I'm doing. If I'm looking for something that's high tempo, I want the session to flow. I don't want it slowing down. So as soon as they get the ball, can they play it back on? Just so we keep the tempo going. But yes, I am also, we have to train the way we want to play, and on match day, there are throw-ins. We have to take that into consideration. So yeah, he's absolutely right. Cool. And there's a time and a place when I play without using throw-ins.
It's just on the throw-in subject as well, Simon.
Yeah.
Elliot says that he went to a tour in Belgium when they used dribble-ons.
Dribble-on, yeah. A lot of teams get the ball down, and you put the ball down, start it behind the line, and off you go again.
And Azif says FA rules allow mini soccer to choose dribble-ons, passes, etc. It's the league that needs to set this in their rules.
And yeah, I mean, it's probably another topic for another day, Rich. But I'm a firm believer in the ball needs to be on the ground. And with the younger players, they struggle, you know, sometimes with their first touch, as it is, without, you know, the ball flying to them in the air and hitting them on the chest or hitting them in the face. Doesn't do a lot for your confidence. So I think we have to build it up. I think throw-ins are an integral part of the game. They're in the game, they're important, but we don't need to start with throw-ins at the under 6s and under 7s. They can learn that skill as they go along, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. What I'd like to do, put this little slide up there for you, and just sort of like to finish off, I want you to look at how this affects your players. And have you seen this in your players, where just to come back with me with some feedback about some analysis on your players, some of the challenges that they face. How are you dealing with those? So over to you if you put your answers back in the chat, really. So what does this picture mean to you and your players?
Which one's your dog, Simon?
The big one, mate, but it's black. Mine's all black. So you'd struggle seeing those leg marks on mine. You'd be all right on yours, Rich.
Say again?
You'd be all right on yours.
Oh, no, yeah.
Rich, I've got about another 5, and then we'll go into questions, yeah? 5.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Yeah. Asif says equality does not equal equity. We should be striving for equity.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that? What's he mean?
Asif, you want to unmute yourself, mate?
Hello?
Hello, mate. You all right?
Hi, yeah. How you doing, guys? You all right?
Yeah, well.
Hello there. How are you?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's just looking at that. It's just that, like it says there, people go through stuff differently. So you could put on a session and think to yourself, everyone's got an equal opportunity. But if you're not taking into account the differences, you're not actually doing the best for all of them. That makes sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, you know, motivational levels. There is a high percentage of young people that drop out of sport. And the reason is sometimes it knocks their self-esteem, it knocks their motivation levels. If they're trying to compete at a level they're not capable of competing at, it's a serious challenge. I know there's other factors surrounding that, because obviously quite often they're playing football because they want to be with their friends, they want to be involved, but that doesn't mean to say that we can't try and accommodate them within those sessions, and set them tasks that are realistic to their needs. And also taking into consideration, maturation, growth and development. My little grandson, he was just 9 in August, but 3 of his friends that play in the same team, they were 10 in September. And there's a significant difference in their, strength, height, weight, and also they've had another year playing football, which is important. So, we have to be mindful of all those different challenges that are out there.
Is that okay, Casey?
Yes, mate.
Nice one. Cheers, mate. We've got a couple more. Elliot says success will look different for each player.
Absolutely, and that's why it's important to set them challenges. By the end of the session, if we may be doing something simple like just keep you up as a rival activity, and one player doesn't want to do it because they can only do 1 or 2. And the other players are doing 10, 15, 20, 25. That's when I start using different sizes of equipment and things like that, because I will say to one player, "Here, you're good at this. Have a go with a tennis ball. See if you can do. Here's a challenge. Can you do 15 with a tennis ball?" And yet, with the players that are struggling a bit, I might say to them, if you need to, you can do 2 and then you can catch the ball, and then try and do 3 and catch the ball again. Build it up that way. So again, it's okay to set them all different challenges within that same practice.
Cool. Dave Senior says confidence plays a big part. Constant praise is a great tool.
Oh, I 100% agree with you, Dave. Confidence, massive. And how do we build that? We build that by creating a positive environment. And praise is essential. If we can keep saying to people, even in a game where a player struggled, if they've given 100%, that's the focus of our feedback to them. Listen, everything didn't come off today, but you've tried your hardest. You worked your socks off. And that was really important to me, your parents and the rest of the coaches today. We all noticed that.
David Summers says, I do 2 teams, under 11 and under 14, and the difference between them is really interesting. We often do similar training sessions, but the way they tackle it, what the outcomes are, where they are in their own development age-wise, etc., varies so much.
Yeah, and I think that's significant. I think as a coach, I think there's great advantages sometimes of you developing your coaching with the players you're working with. Because if you take your players from under 7s through to under 14s, you see that development, you see the maturation, you see how they change. I have to be fairly honest, I spent most of my coaching and working life working with 16 to 19-year-olds. And I would say, am I an expert on that area? Pretty close, because year in, year out, I know potentially what's going to happen, how they're going to behave, what are their patterns, what they like, what sort of things they get up to, etc., because I've studied them, observed them over a long period of time. So for me, with that age group, I'm pretty proficient. But likewise, if I had to go back to under 7s again, I'd have to start doing a lot of research. And I remember my wife volunteering me to go in and coach in my grandson's school, even though I didn't have any time available. But I went in, and I forgot how tough they are at that age, under 7s. God blimey, classroom door opened and they come bolting out, and they're all over the place. And I certainly, it was one of the hardest hours I had to work on for quite a long time. And it was back to the drawing board for me. I had to start looking at little games, thinking about their ABCs, their balance, coordination, and agility and stuff like that. So I had to start refocusing my mind to that age group and that level.
And final one for Elliot. For one player, they just have more. Sorry, I'll start again. For one player, just having more touches when they receive the ball might be success.
Yeah, I think he's quite right. you're not going to get better if you don't have any touches on the ball. You're not going to get better if you don't learn how to practice and receive. Those players that are struggling, if they're given opportunities, they're going to improve. Everybody will improve if they have practice time. So it's making sure you're maximizing your practice time and the qualities available for that to happen.
Cool. That's it at the moment, mate.
Okay, mate. I have come to the end of my slides, I think. Oh no, sorry, looking at players, sorry, the last one. So going back to what we were talking about using the underload method, involving a pitch player's basic equipment, clear outcomes and scoring. So in those game scenarios, it might be that we're going to be putting players under pressure through different challenges. Pitch, like I said earlier, the pitch, we could divide that into smaller pitches, lots of different size goals. We could have end zones, we could have retreat lines, all those sort of things which will challenge the players. We could have time sessions. We could have sessions that, when we say time sessions, you've got a minute on receiving the ball on your first touch to get a shot off. And again, that could be players. It might be an activity that you're doing, like a shooting practice, where the players are going to work against the clock. So they're going to work for 30 seconds. Each player might have a 30-second attempt at that, in different areas. And then again, maximizing opportunities for that to happen. Basic equipment, again, I don't think, you need a lot of equipment. The game is pretty simple. As long as we've got cones to mark out an area. And a lot of times coaches say to me, well, we've only got one goal available. Well, play into that goal, or use it that if you're playing attack and defense, the defense players have to get the ball out to 2 smaller goals. It's very important that if you're playing attack v defense, you give opportunities for the defending players to have a goal, so they can pass out to something, they can have an objective. If they win the ball back, they can run it out, dribble it out, play it into goals at the other end. Make sure the players understand the clear outcomes. What are you trying to achieve in this? So, what are we trying to achieve? And it might be a simple scenario, like, based on what I've seen in the game the week before, I might be saying to my players, played well last week, but one of the areas we were challenged with a little bit was our midfield players getting the ball, turning and playing it into our strikers. And that's what we're going to work on today. So they're very clear that we are still playing football, but the emphasis is on the midfield players getting the ball, turning and playing out. That doesn't mean to say all players can't have a go at that. We will rotate the players around. But ultimately, that's what my session might be geared around today, because to meet the needs of those players. Scoring systems, like we said, how do they score? We could have 4 goals. It doesn't always have to be. Every time you score, you can change direction. Sometimes I don't use goals, I use end zones. I go that you've got, certainly if you're doing a running with a ball or a dribbling activity, they don't have to score. All you have to do is run the ball into the end zone. Okay. In summing up, really, differentiation for me is a crucial part. And going back to what I said earlier, that children first, sport second is the key. Your sessions will improve if you change your focus around and look at what do the players need. How can I help those players collectively and individually, and more important, individually, one, have a great experience in the coaching environment, and wanting to come back week on, week out, because they're all learning something, and 2, it will improve the team. So, stop going on to your, onto the boot room and places like that, looking for sessions to do. Start looking at what your players need and then match a session up to their needs. That's where I think we are in terms of the coaching differentiation style. Keep working at it, and we'll now take any questions, please, that you want to throw at us.
Cool, thank you, Simon. If you've got a question, just literally write the word question, and then I'll let you know when you can unmute yourself, just so it's good. But while we wait for a couple of questions to come in, there's been a bit of chat, which is great. David says he was on a webinar with Jack Walton the other night, and he asked us to read all around the effects in terms of praise. Depends on what we praise, the difference between feedback and praise. Really interesting area, the whole snowflake thing. Do we praise too much for everything, and then they are looking for it all the time? And it does. People have obviously replied to that. Just what's your thoughts on that, Steve?
I think praise is really important. It's about creating that positive environment where people feel confident to learning. We do have to put things right. For example, if a player, takes a shot and it goes over the crossbar on match days, and everybody shouts, "Oh, great shot!" Honestly, there's nothing great about that. He's missed the target. If that player starts thinking that every time he takes a shot, it's okay to miss it because people are going to say that's a great shot anyway. So we need to be, what I would say to that player is brilliant. I love your attitude. Every time you get the ball, you want to shoot. But if we're going to maximize your efforts, we need to start getting it on target. So in training, we're going to have to work a little bit on your finishing, getting it on target. But I love the fact that you are being positive in terms of confident in taking shots. So same message, but I'm going to wrap it up because we've got to deal with the fact that player's, missing the target on a regular basis. We need to work on their technique. So praise is important, but in the right areas as well.
Yeah, that's what Elliot says as well on today. It says praising what you're looking for is key, especially if you've set a challenge, making feedback specific and a non-contextual. Well done. And it goes on as well about that word unlucky.
Yeah, it's not. We can't keep saying unlucky because players will start believing it is. And sometimes it is a bit of bad luck. It might have took a bad bobble, but it will be down to technique at the end of the day. If they're going to get their ratios up in terms of taking opportunities.
I remember on my level 2 was done by Ian Bateman a few years ago, and he said unlucky is if a plane falls out of the sky and hits you, like kind of thing. That's unlucky. Missing the target or doing something like that is not. And Barry asks regarding scenario-based tasks, if a team are demotivated by the score, what methods, ideas do you use to keep them motivated? Is the challenge to stay within the game? Is this an opportunity to learn how to lose, as this is a part of the game and life at times?
I think I might put it into quarters. I might try and, if we're losing a lot, put the game into areas where the first quarter of the first half, we only lost by 1 goal. Second quarter, we lost by 2. Third quarter, 3, and fourth quarter, 4. Now that might be down to the players. My players aren't concentrating or their fitness levels are dropping. But why did we play well in the first quarter? What was more significant about that? So it might be helpful to say to players, look, the first 15 minutes of that half an hour, you did really well because you were concentrating and focused. So there might be reasons about why that's come about. So I think you've got to, break it down into smaller areas and look at the game. We're not asking people to become analysts, but simple analysis will help you say to the players, for the first 15 minutes, you were fit and strong and you kept going. What we need to do now is try and see if we can do that for the second 15 minutes up till half time. So it might be that might be the challenge in the second week. How do we play in the second 15 minutes of that first half? So just an idea.
Is there, so Barry says as well about the opportunity to learn how to lose, as this is a part of the game and life at times.
I think that's important, I think, for everybody. I think you've got to put losing into perspective. It's part of the game. I think, I think what's really important for me though is I love going to watch my grandson play when the games are fairly evenly matched. If they play a game and they win 8-0 or 9-0 or lose 6 or 7-0, it's not the same. So I think it's really important wherever possible we can get the games matched up. because they're much more exciting and better for the players as well.
I know as a parent as well, like even I've got 2 5-year-olds, like to lose not just football but anything is a challenge. I suppose it's important just to manage that and guide them through it. John asks, what is your view on working on individual units for half of a training session rather than the whole team, so it helps with the development of the individual roles? And should this happen every session before getting back to play a game, or every so often?
I think it's really important to work on individual sessions. I mean, part of, we talk about in the 4 corners, we talk about technical and tactical, and quite often people interpret tactics as team tactics. Well, tactics is individual tactics as well. If you're asking a player to play in a certain position, do they understand that role and the responsibilities attached to that role? And that's quite important. Do all players understand, that if we lose possession, they've got to get back behind the ball? Can we practice that in training? Yeah, sure we can. So I'm not sure about stipulating half the session on that, but certainly I would encourage the use of individual roles and responsibilities as part of coaching. I think players need to know what the role of a wide player is, what the role of a striker is. That's important.
Yeah, Elliot adds there, says if you improve individuals' decision making or units, it will improve the team overall, in his opinion.
I would agree with Elliot 100%. Yeah, definitely. Players need to understand what they're about, and it helps them work as units as well. If players have an understanding of the goalkeeper's role, what are they doing? They're not just there. Of course, they're there to stop shots and make saves, but they're also there if we're planning on playing out from the back. They're part of that defensive unit. They have to understand that. How do I support the goalkeeper if he's looking to pass the ball out to me? Where should I be positioned? So, and that's sometimes difficult because when if you're working on a small area, going back to size again, when it comes to match day, it's a challenge if you haven't worked on it. Hence why I go back to saying if you do get a chance and you can get on the pitch a little bit earlier, try and go through those scenarios and just look at how players can, further understand those roles and responsibilities.
Wicked. And in terms of the rotation of positions as well, I suppose that benefits that as well.
I think this is just my own philosophy. At a young age, everybody should play in every position, including goalkeeper. I have a strong belief that under sevens, everybody should have at least one going goal, so they know what it's like if a ball goes through your legs and you lose 1-0. We always tend to look and blame the goalkeeper. Yeah, he wouldn't have got that shot off if the defence had been watching, or we hadn't missed 5 chances earlier. So, I think it's really important that people can empathise what's it like to be a defender, even if you are an attacker. I mean, in the modern game, some of the best defenders are your attacking players, aren't they? They certainly are. If we can get players to win the ball back high up, so everybody should have an understanding of defending and forward.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Don't have any further questions at the moment. It was a question I was going to ask you, and I was completely.
Sorry.
Oh, hello, go for it. Whoever that is, sorry.
Yes, sorry to unmute like this.
No, not at all.
I just want to say that my chat function is disabled for some reason. Can I ask a question like this?
Of course you can, Peter. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I was managing like an under 10 girls team a couple of years ago, and I tried one of the things which Simon said, where I underloaded my better players. However, it kind of backfired, where the players were unhappy. They wanted to get back to like dominating the others easy. The parents didn't like it as well. I had the mothers calling me a bad coach and the whole lot. And yeah, so how do you deal in that kind of a situation where the better players do not react to like you putting them in a harder situation?
I think it's a great question as well, and I think you've got to challenge the players and the parents by saying, listen, we need to get, at the moment your players are in a comfort zone, it's too easy for them, And what we want to do, if we're going to improve them as players, we need to put them in more difficult situations where they've got to work it out for themselves. And I think it's not just because it didn't work on that first session, I would go back to it. But I certainly would discuss it with the parents. I think it's really important to share your philosophies with the parents, because if the children are moaning at the parents and their understanding of football is not great, they will just come back to you with their child's concerns without fully knowing what their child is complaining about. So I think what you've got to do from the beginning is share your philosophy, saying, look, this is why I want to challenge you. These are the reasons behind it. And this is what the outcomes will be if we can persevere with it. Let's give it a couple more weeks and see if we can help you improve as players. Does that help you?
Yeah, that helped. Yeah, thanks for the answer.
Stick with it. I try and stick with it and don't, try and go back to it again.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, all right, Rick.
Sorry, I was just talking and I forgot I was on mute. It says Tu Chao, can't pronounce his name, Elliot, sorry, calls it differential training, making it harder in training so it's easier on a match day. Asif says, in regards to Peter's question, is it about creating the right environment? An environment where learning is prioritized with an acceptance that it will look messy, will take time, not easy to implement overnight.
Yeah, and I think it's sticking to your philosophies as well. I mean, the last question, it does take time. It's not going to happen overnight, and mess is good. The game's messy sometimes, isn't it? So it's good. I mean, I sometimes describe my sessions as the M25 in rush hour. Not at the moment, like, but on a busy day, you want it to look busy because that's how the game is, changing direction, changing angles. It is messy. So don't be worried about it being messy. That's good, in my opinion.
Yeah, and as Steve says, it will take time.
Yeah, what was the first question? I missed that one.
Which one? Elliot's one?
Yeah, what was the first one you asked me?
Oh, was it, Tu Chao calls it differential training, making it harder in training so it's easier on a match day. Not really a question, but more of a statement, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, train the way you want to play. Great Alex Ferguson quote. I am a fan of putting it high intensity training on in match days. We haven't come for a little jog around. I'd rather have 45 minutes, 30 minutes of high intensity than an hour of, at 50%. You can't train at 50% and on match days hope to produce 100%. It's not going to happen. So you have to train at good levels, good intensities, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Dave Senior says, get your philosophy out, supplement it with profiling of your players and share with parents.
100%. Let the parents know what you're trying to achieve. They'll buy into it, and let them know how that 100% the most important player in that team is their child. So it's really important that you can relay back to the parents how you're individually trying to help their child as well as the team. So, what goals, if you're setting goals for their child, share them with the parents, and maybe you can do that through homework tasks where, a youngster is struggling with their juggling. It's no different to school, really. That's why I say differentiation. It might be that they need a little bit of home help where, they can get a ball in the back garden and practice their juggling. So all you need to show them is a few techniques, what might happen. But, the parents could be there in the back garden, even if they're not footballers, to encourage them, and count for them and just get them out there. So, they do play a significant role, the parents, and you do need to get them on board, 100%.
Yeah, David Summers says, always remember from my level 1, chaos is good.
Yeah, who is his tutor? That might help.
Let us know, David, who your tutor is. We'll just go to Martin, who says, I play all players in all positions, including goalkeepers. But what age would you start to give players their own positions? He's doing under 10s at the moment, so he's in no rush, but just wondering. No,
I think for me personally, I think experience. For example, if I had a player who's predominantly right-footed, I'd want to play him on the left-hand side. For me, by the end of any season, if all my players could pass, dribble, and shoot with both feet, what a good coach I'd be. So it's challenging players out of their comfort zones, because sometimes you'll get parents come in and the dads will say, "Oh yeah, my son's a right back." Right back. Well, we're playing. It's under sevens. We're playing five-a-side. There isn't really a right back. Well, that's a classic one, isn't it, Rich? Where parents will come and say, "Oh, my son plays in the hole." Well, what hole's that? We've just had the pitch fixed. We haven't got any holes. Well, you don't say that to the players, but parents are thinking it. But reality is, sometimes we pigeonhole players into saying that's his best position, or that's her best position. Well, it's not about that. It's about them challenging themselves to be versatile and learn all the positions. I think once you start getting to secondary school, that's the time probably when you start to realise you might be, needing to specialise a little bit more. But even saying that, players like John Terry, a centre midfielder, ends up being one of the best centre halves in the Premier League. Players start off in different positions and progress to other positions as time happens, and some players are versatile,
Yeah.
I'm sure, some players would not have played as many games as they did do at top level if they hadn't been able to play in more than one position,
There's a podcast coming out of Emerson Boyce, myself and Rivo did, coming out a couple of weeks, where he was a centre. He was a striker until the age of 14, and then had a career at centre back. So I suppose.
And a good career, by the way.
Yeah, very good career. So and a cup win, FA Cup win. Steve says, "Well, do we know what position they'll be at 21? If not, what are we basing on at 10?"
Do we know what positions they'll be at 21?
Yeah, that's But what do we know? What position they'll be at 21? If not, what are we basing on at 10?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Things can change. I think as well. Prematuration, it's very difficult because some players develop, they become a bit more taller and gangly, they lose a bit of pace, and all things can change, significantly. The brain doesn't work as quick. They were quick little thinkers. They've moved up the ladder. They're now playing at a higher level, where the requirements of a centre midfielder is to think a little bit quicker, whereas they might need a little bit more time on the ball. So we naturally sometimes develop and naturally find a position that suits us as we progress and get older.
And it says top academies don't specialise positions until at least after puberty. And he also says you also limit in technical ability.
Correct, just as I said there. So for me, 11, 12 is about the right time. Once we get to secondary school, we can start looking at that maybe. But even then, certainly not to pigeonhole players and say you're a defender. And I think sometimes as well, there's a little bit of madness goes on. Quite often you'll play against teams and their quickest and best player is their striker. And we quite often put our slowest players and our bigger players at the back. So it's a total mismatch. Their fastest player against our slowest player.
Great
How
point.
does that work? That's madness. No wonder we've conceded X amount of goals. So sometimes you go back and, like I say, look at the matchups. How are you matching up against them? Or do you think I'm going like for like? If they score 9, we'll try and score 10. If that's your philosophy, fair play to you. But sometimes you've got to look at how demoralising that can be if that defender's getting ran past every time by a really good player.
Yeah, as Eve said, just touching on a point earlier, it says if we want to be forward-thinking coaches, we have to accept that it won't be for some parents, and we will lose good players. However, it shouldn't change However, it shouldn't change what we are about. Parents are key, but shouldn't sway our decisions. Great.
No,
great point.
no, quite right. You are a bit of a salesperson. You have to try and sell your philosophy. You have to bear in mind that sometimes parents have come into the game not knowing a lot about football. Some parents have good knowledge, but some parents don't. So you have to communicate well with them and let them know what it is you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it. So it is keep reminding them what the focus is about. So keeping them involved as well, because sometimes if they're not involved, they make up their own ideas, which is when it becomes challenging.
Just going back again, around like players and or what age, etc. for positions. Elliot says Harry Watling is now a coach at West Ham. Says he will put his better players at the back. They then have more players to beat.
Yeah, again, I agree. I agree. For those players that are finding it easy, how are we going to challenge them? So we have to make challenges realistic. If the challenges are too easy, we get bored. If I come to train every week and thinking, same old, we did this last week, it's boring now. So how am I going to get those players out of their comfort zones and get them to be working at their maximum? Because that's important.
Dave Senior says, I think it's situation dependent. I coach adult female, and some of these are mums who have not played before. I place them into positions relative to their strengths across the four corners.
Great idea. I think to start off with, you've got to ease them into it. So some positions did, without a shadow of a doubt, require more decision making. So if we can start off players in a position where it's comfortable and easy for them, that's important as well. And less numbers, play with smaller games so they've got less decisions to make initially, if possible, in training. Great
point. That's it at the moment. I will just give a minute or so, Simon, just to people who may be still typing. If you just move on a couple of slides for me, Si.
Yeah, for sure, mate.
There we go. Just let you know, a lot of you already know, but I'm going to tell you again. It's podcast coming out this coming Thursday. So starting off with Jade Moore, and then we've got Emerson Boyce, Gareth Ainsworth, Steve Nicol, etc. Some good ones coming up. So keep an eye out for that. Just switch it again for me, Si.
Yes, man.
So coming up next week is Tuesday. We've got a new thing called the surgery. So it's just like a Q&A, just to open up. We've got a question to ask about coaching. Mick Lewin's sat in the hot seat for that one. So it's at 7 o'clock. And then very honoured to have Pete Sturgis join myself and Rivo for a live podcast on Wednesday at 7 o'clock. So
that will be good.
Yeah, very good. So sign up. Don't miss that if you want to do that. We've got a couple of things. We've got a panel where we're talking about Messi versus Ronaldo. We've got a good panel as well, which we'll share. And then next week's CBD is Introduction to Futsal Level 1 with Andy Ritchie. So those who have not done a futsal course, or if you have, you just want to remind yourselves, that's a good one. But if you do, if there's no further questions, I think so. There's nothing else come on the chat. Just want to take this opportunity to thank you. I know talking about coming out of comfort zones, etc. I know you obviously come out your comfort zone to do this, and I really appreciate it. I think it's been really valuable. So thank you very much.
Yes, mate.
Is that all your fan mail coming in?
It's someone's buzzing, mate. I don't know who it is.
But no, I just want
to. But listen, no, great.
Thank you.
Everybody gone off now, have they?
No, they're all saying thank you.
All right,
on the chat.
Well, I'm glad they've enjoyed it. It's great, been great fun. I've enjoyed it. Yeah. Which is important. And keep up the good work. Hopefully we'll get back to football soon.
Definitely.